is Digital Marketing Depot, broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webinar producer. Thank you for joining us today for The Future is Now. Ramp up your Google Shopping ROI. We are very pleased to welcome Colleen Fries, Director of Feed Education at Feedonomics, and Andreas Reifen, CEO of Crealytics. Before I turn the webinar over to our speakers, I want to tell all of you a couple of things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Ask a Question box, and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor, Crealytics, or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them, and they will take you where you want to go. The hashtag for today is DMDWC. We are going to hear a lot of great content, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this broadcast, and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email when it's ready. All right, with that business taken care of, let me make some formal introductions. Colleen Fries, Director of Feed Education at Feedonomics, is a digital marketer with years of experience focused on paid search and shopping campaigns. She was formerly the lead of the structured data and feeds team at iProspect and has worked with large brands including Apple, Sears, and Estee Lauder. Andreas Reifen, CEO of Crealytics, is an entrepreneur, marketing technologist, and expert in data-driven advertising. Between 2006 and 2008, Andreas operated as a PPC super affiliate working for Zappos and other retailers. Now you can see more complete bios for our speakers on the left side of your audience console. Remember, if you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Ask a Question box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So with that, I will turn the webcast over to Andy to get us started. Andy, there's your first slide.
Thanks, Karen, for the introduction. And I'm happy to be here and to share our content with you guys. So as you probably know, there are lots of webinars with in-depth analysis and tips about every nitty-gritty topic. I'd like to start a bit different today and give you some high-level top-down views on Google Shopping. So something we observed recently is quite interesting. So we see that there's a strong increase in paid clicks overall in Google Shopping. However, there's a decrease in cost per click. And the market would kind of expect that the cost per click would pick up and constantly grow. But our data is kind of telling a different story. And we'd like to explore a bit why we see these metrics, because there's some interesting actionable advice in it. On the right-hand side, you see that the share of Google Shopping is always constantly increasing, and it's hitting 74% already. But what is going on under the hood which leads to a decrease, a deflation of the cost per click? So there's always one story which is shared by Google, and I assume that it's the only point they refer to because it's very easy to understand, and this is the shift towards mobile. As you might know, mobile clicks are still way less expensive than clicks on desktop. So if spend shifts from desktop to mobile, this of course would mean that there's a decline in cost per click. However, the additional volume of mobile would partly overcompensate this. So this could explain why volume increases but cost per click goes down. From our point of view, there are some other as important factors which play a key role here. So one thing is that we see that ad space is constantly being increased. So as you can see on the chart on the right-hand side, there's just a 16% of growth in organic over the last year. However, there's a 78% growth in paid, which means that the proportion of clicks going to paid is constantly increasing. And if you take a look at the SERP examples here, you see that mobile is covering way more ad space now, and also on the desktop SERPs, you see that these paid formats are being pushed. So this means that there's an excess in ad supply, which means that budgets wouldn't keep up immediately. So you take the same budget, but you allocate it to a broader or larger amount of clicks, which can explain why cost per click goes down and volume increases. There's an additional factor, and Google has been exploring their abilities to push PLAs more into generic areas or into areas where people don't search for a specific product, but rather for a designer term alone or a category term alone. And you can see in these numbers here that over the last several quarters, the traffic volumes of pure designer terms or category-only terms have significantly increased. So it's another point where there's an excess in ad supply in Google Shopping, so budgets won't be able to keep up that quickly, and that's why cost per click is going down. As a third factor, we see that people have started interacting in a different way with Google Shopping ads. And you can see on the comparison on the right side that in 2014 compared to 2016, there were more clicks involved in order to make a purchase in the end. So paid sessions per user year over year has gone up, which means that if users need now many more clicks than years ago to make the purchase, that advertisers wouldn't be willing to pay the same price, because in the end there's just one conversion. So all these different facts lead to the situation where we have a deflated cost per click. So your key takeaway now is what you see here, that essentially the cost per click on Google Shopping is 21% higher than on search text ads. However, the earning per click, so the revenue you make per click on average, is 62% higher on Google Shopping. And you already see that text ads and text ads desktop and shopping mobile are roughly at the same level. So this clearly means that there's a temporary gap in the market. Today, shopping is relatively inexpensive. Although we all might perceive that it's really expensive, it's still paying off to take budgets from traditional text ad-based search and reallocate it in shopping. So the key takeaways are that cost per clicks on text ads are still higher, but the conversion rate on Google Shopping is way more efficient, so this format really pays off right now. We will probably see a continuous deflation of cost per clicks. However, there will be more budget needed to cover all these clicks which are ever increasing. And for you, as you are running Google Shopping, this means try to invest now. Don't wait too much. There won't be a better opportunity to invest the money, because at a certain point when Google won't be able to further increase the supply side of ads, then cost per click will pick up and things will get way more expensive. And it's just a matter of time. So invest your money now and you will acquire customers at a much lower price than in a couple of years. So let's go into one more tactical topic. We call it Google Shopping campaign segmentation. So what is this about? In Google Shopping, Google Shopping has solved one problem. It got rid of keywords. So all the hassle of managing millions of keywords and ad copies is gone now. And Google translates from query to product and takes a lot of work off our shoulders. But there's one key limitation in the system, and we try to illustrate it here on the slide. So imagine that user A is searching for a specific shoe model, has something very, very specific in mind, and this Nike soccer shoe pops up. And the second person, in this case B, is searching for soccer shoes in general. And the same product pops up. As an advertiser, you're only able to place a bid on the unit of the product, so the dollar in this case. However, if you analyze data under the hood, you will realize that the soccer shoes term will have a much lower conversion rate than another term which contains the brand name. And if there's not only a brand name contained, but a brand name plus a specific product name, we usually see the highest conversion rates. So performance is kind of influenced in a negative way because you have to bid by averages in order to get a lot of exposure for user A and probably decrease the investment for user B. You would have to segment the bids, but this is nothing the system is currently designed for. So how could we solve this? What we would like to have is for the specific queries, we would want to run a high bid, as you can see here, but for the more generic one, a low bid. So get a lot of the good traffic and leave the not so good traffic to your competitors. And there's a trick we can apply. So what needs to be done is using the campaign priorities. So what you can do is run one campaign with a high priority and exclude everything which is designer names or brand names plus the product names. Run a second campaign with a medium priority and exclude the product names. So this means that the very specific queries are being filtered down to a campaign with a low priority. And in the end, you calculate your bids in different buckets. So usually you would end up with high bids for the specific queries which are in the lowest bucket, a medium high bid for the queries which fall into the mid bucket, and you would run a low bid for the generic queries. So when we tested this, we saw a quite consistent increase in performance. So what we try to do here is we set up a test. We had a control group and a test group, and we saw that at the same traffic volume, the test group had a cost per order which was 27% lower than the control group. So doing this sort of segmentation and bidding high for the best queries and leaving the not so good queries to someone else has a quite strong, considerable impact. So it's something which has proven to be very successful, and I highly recommend everyone to do this. It's possible doing this manually. You just have to update several lists, and there are also some tools on the market which help you to do this in a more automated way. Something we heard from Google initially, I think now we don't get the same question again, is does this setup affect the performance of your campaigns? So if you run your best keywords in a campaign which has a low priority, would this mean that these queries or products wouldn't perform as well as if they were in a campaign with a high priority? So what we did is we just scheduled campaigns to run them intermittently throughout the day, and we just set one priority and then we switched to another, and we saw that no matter whether the priority was high, medium, or low, the performance was pretty much the same. There are just tiny differences. So it means that the priorities just help you to filter traffic through the negatives, but it doesn't affect performance in any sense by itself. So another very interesting part is if you raise your bids without this segmentation of campaigns and of queries, what happens is and this is one of our tests we performed, and we see this again and again. We had a bid of just 50 cents on the left side, and we then increased the bid to 150. What is really impressive, and you see the cost per click we paid in these small bubbles here, that you get roughly the same amount of designer-only terms and designer terms, so the best queries. However, your price is much higher. So imagine you get the same amount of good clicks, but you pay a much higher price for them. But what you end up getting is a hell lot of not so good traffic, which means that your traffic quality overall goes down. So your bidding system would really struggle because it starts bidding up, but then the revenue per click would go down, which is quite difficult to handle. So what in fact is happening in these Google Shopping auctions is that we have an S-shaped curve. So if you're sitting at the bottom of the curve and you start bidding higher, then you get a heavy increase in impressions and hence performance. But if you're sitting already on top of this curve, you will pay way more on a per click basis, but you won't get an additional significant impact of impressions. You see it here with a 17% plus. So in order to capitalize on the fact that we have this S-shaped curve, it's tremendously helpful to segment campaigns. So it helps right away to improve performance, but also bidding is way easier if you gain control over where the queries actually map. So our advice is segment campaigns by specificity, do it as we suggested here in the deck. Know that there's an S-shaped curve and start experimenting by bidding slightly up and down and trying to fit the sweet spot, and constantly monitor things because the market environment might change and you need to learn again after a certain period of time. I know that I'm already at 17 minutes, so not so much time is left. However, I'd like to give you some quite interesting and actionable advice on product title optimization. So what is this actually about? We tested which feed attributes actually have an impact on performance. So with product titles, we saw a strong impact. Changing titles definitely impact performance. We tested different variations of product descriptions, and we didn't see any strong significant impact. So we are assuming that if there's any impact, it's so small that you shouldn't care about it. Then we tested the Google category, and we saw something similar. We destroyed it completely. Instead of athletic shoes, we put in rain suits, and there was no impact at all. So your takeaway is just care about product titles and probably forget the rest. And talking about product titles, we performed a large-scale test. So we changed more than 16,000 different titles, which had more than 5 million impressions in total. And something we learned is that if you factor in unrelated terms, so you add Christmas to whatever product, or you add Black Friday, or because you want to sell a shoe as a gift, you add the word gift, all this stuff does not work. Google is simply too smart, and they know about this already. If you have existing queries which already get a lot of exposure, factoring in these queries into the product titles, like if your product is called notebook and you write then laptop, it doesn't mean that you necessarily would get more impressions for laptops because Google already knows that laptop is the same as notebook. It's a synonym. However, there was a strong and significant impact for any query which was still underrepresented. So where Google doesn't clearly understand what certain words are about, and you can help them to map searches against the right products. And let's take some examples. So in total, we saw that the underrepresented queries had a very strong positive impact. So we factored several queries in, and we saw that in total, the volume of these queries went up by 34%, whereas the overall account just had a slight increase of 11%. This is kind of our test group here. We have some really interesting examples like the Jordan kids. For some reason, Google didn't give us the volume we could have gotten. You see it here in the keyword planner. There was a huge volume available, but we only got a tiny little bit. So once we factored Jordan kids into the product title, we saw a massive increase of impressions on the query level. Very similar, we saw a very similar effect we saw in this case. So we factored in designer, trainer into this product, and we got a 7,000% increase before after. So apparently Google didn't really understand these words before, but once we factored them into the titles, there was a very, very heavy impact. Okay, just the remaining two slides, how do you spot these promising queries which are missing? And one way is to take your existing traffic and map it against the keyword planner, the predicted traffic. And if you see a gap like here in term 3, it's very likely that it helps to factor these terms into your product titles. A different way to do this is compare your search performance against your shopping performance. And if you see that in search you're getting a lot of volume for the ballerinas, but in shopping you don't get the same volume for the ballerinas, there's probably something wrong with the product titles. So analyze whether important queries around the ballerinas term are factored into the titles, and if not, try to get them in. And this is how you can really make a big impact, and I highly recommend to take a close look at your feed. So I'm going to skip this slide as time is short, and being respectful with Colleen, I'm going to hand over back first to Karen.
Great. Thank you, Andy. That was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I want to remind the audience that if you have questions about anything that Andy has talked about, or going forward anything that Colleen talks about, please use that Ask a Question box. We're happy to get to them at the end of the formal presentation. Right now, before we do get to Colleen, we do have a poll question for you. Now that we're talking about product listing ads, we want to know, how do you manage your product ad bids today? Do you manage them manually, using Google's automated bidding, using an enterprise suite like Marin, Kenshu, or Adobe, or using a shopping-specific bidding tool like Kamado, Whoopee, or Sidecar? Not Whoopee, excuse me, Whoop, or Sidecar. While you think about that and plug in your answers, I'll also remind you that we will make this broadcast available on demand. It should be ready later today, and I will send an email out when it's ready so you can go over and rethink about a lot of the great content that Andy and Colleen are talking about. Let's take a look at our results. All right, so we got a lot of people manually managing their product ads. Colleen, I'm going to bring you into the conversation. Is that a result that surprises you, or are you surprised that people are not using more automated tools to do this?
I'm actually not surprised. It really all depends on where everyone is currently at with their, if it's an agency or if it's an in-house team on it. So really not surprising here, but depending on the kind of performance on platforms, there's some great platforms out there that really do have some great semantic technology to go ahead and adjust bids. So welcome.
All right, well, go ahead. There's your introductory.
Hey, great. Well, welcome. I'm going to take it a step further, but more with a feed-based focus from what Andy was talking about. So first off, kind of to slide in and connect what he had said about the Jordan kids query on it. Really, you need to keep the consumer in mind with a lot of your feed data. So first off, where are your customers and where are they buying? So think about their geography of where they're currently at. Certain products may be better selling in certain geographies than others. Next is then, are consumers seeing the same or competing products with enticing pricing? Think about the overall competitive pricing of the landscape that's out there of the products that you or your clients are currently selling, because price competitiveness does make a difference on whether or not a consumer is going to go ahead and click on one ad versus another, because it may have a slightly more enticing price point for a similar product. Next is also, what time of year are people buying certain products? Think about the seasonality. As you kind of structure both your feed data and your campaigns out, one of the biggest things that I used to in agency life go and think about is the seasonality of our text ad campaigns, of our shopping campaigns, but you also really want to know which products are more seasonal in order to have the best performance and really get very efficient with your spending. So this is just an example of ways to really think about that data on it. So for the geography portion on it, especially with the weather in the Northeast right now, if you have products that are, maybe salt and shovels on it, or even services, you really need to think about maybe boosting up those products, which comes down to segmenting in your campaigns, which kind of either regional focus or maybe it's putting a seasonal focus that these items are all winter related, and getting up a campaign really quickly. And the quickest way to go ahead and do that is transforming your data into a custom label that says this is all snow weather items, and going ahead and starting a quick campaign with it to really optimize and get your products in front of those consumers in the Northeast that need them right now. The other here is the seasonality of it. So think about too, like the holidays, and as Mother's Day is fast approaching, or it could be anything, even certain clothing that may sell a little bit better in certain seasons, but then you see a year-over-year decline. You really want to have a strategy in place that's going to be solid, especially year-over-year. It could always change, of course, and should always be strategic, but think about the things that you've seen historically perform in the past, and that is looking at that product performance data that's in the feed, and pair that with maybe it's an item grouping of different variations that this style sells really well, or it's just this overall make or model that sells well. Keep that in mind as you're both structuring your feed data in order to really get the best results out of the front end of your campaign. This is definitely an interesting facet, is the competitive pricing aspect. If you go ahead and type into Google the UPC of a product, as you can see here, I typed the UPC in for MAC lipstick on it, and you can see that there's multiple competitors here with variations on pricing. Now, if your business intelligence team has data of what competitor pricing is out there, this is a great opportunity to marry that data with your products in the feed and utilize that in the front end of your campaigns on it. Or there's other tools out there that can go ahead and grab this data that's on shopping for you, so you know where your competitors are at and where you're not necessarily bidding up high enough to even make it on this front page with the UPC. Okay, so I started alluding to leveraging that feed data with some of that either business intelligence or competitive intelligence that's out there, and utilizing that feed data and marrying it to the front end of your campaign management. So start thinking about your price competitiveness. This is a very strategic way that's going to enhance your campaigns, let you get more efficient with your spend, as well as really get more product visibility where you may be lacking. Next is overall channel performance on it. Are you performing well in Google Shopping or even Bing Shopping on it, or some of the other marketplaces out there? Marrying that data across different channels is going to give you some great insights at the product level in your feed on what really makes sense to be marketing in different channels. Next is inventory levels. So having your overall inventory levels versus just in stock and out of stock is a great way to go ahead and either pull back when your inventory starts getting low, because there's different attribution levels depending on the types of products and clients and brands that are out there, on it. If you can be more strategic and pull back visibility on a product in feed and make it out of stock once it gets down to maybe only 5 products left on it, because you know over time the sales velocity of that product, it'll probably sell out in the next day or two on it. You implement inventory levels within your feed and utilize your feed partners in order to then create different custom rules that's going to enhance that performance. And then the next is, do you have current visibility to new products right now? New products come into the feed all the time, and your campaign structures may already be set up to automatically flow those new products into the campaign. But do you have a top-of-mind awareness of this? Certain brands and just overall stores that are in e-commerce right now, there may be certain products that are kind of hot items. And if you have a pulse onto what your new products are, or you know that if you push your new products a little bit stronger, you'd get some really good return on that ad spend, that is key. So going ahead and knowing which products are coming into your feed, maybe create that custom label so that way you can easily group those new products, and then set a transformation in your feed that says once this product hits maybe it's the 2-week mark, you'll need to look at your data in order to know whether or not the right timing is going to be a week or a month later after it's had visibility. But go ahead and look into that data, create a transformation, and maybe it comes down after a week time period, and that way it just goes into the regular mix of all the rest of the products that are out there, and it doesn't get some type of higher bid levels for increased visibility. So I want to dive in a little bit further with leveraging that data and how to go ahead and utilize it dynamically. So let's take that competitive pricing example. So after you've gone ahead and utilized some of your competitive data that you know that's out there on a product within, let's say, the Google Shopping channel, and you know that this product, the Smack lipstick, is priced a little bit too high for your company, or maybe a little bit lower, you want to go ahead and set up different rules within your feed so that way if you wanted to adjust the front end of your campaign to then say maybe it's a high performer, maybe it's a lower performer, you want to be able to dynamically have it auto adjust based on click data that's coming in. So marrying back that AdWords data back to your feed, as well as taking the competitive pricing data so that as your pricing changes, you're really floating products into the correct buckets in the front end of your campaigns that have the best bids tied to it. So kind of like what Andreas was saying with your search queries, different search queries are more valuable than others, and others you don't want to go ahead and, especially generic queries, you don't want to be bidding as high on that. Same thing if your product pricing is just way higher than the rest of the competition that's out there, you don't want to be trying to outbid them, because more than likely the consumers are not going to go ahead and click on that because you are extremely overpriced. But if you are kind of on the same level as them, you may want to be a little bit more aggressive with that bidding. So maybe asking, how do we kind of look into that a little deeper and do that? So this is just a quick number set. This is not actual numbers, but it's something that you could realistically kind of get a good look at when you look at a few different products when you pull it down from the Dimensions tab in AdWords. How do you go ahead and assign bids then to products that may not have gone ahead and converted as well? So you need to analyze that data. I recommend going ahead and looking month over month at that data, look at it year over year, because depending on the client, those product mix that they have, there may be a lot of seasonality that's in there. There may not be a lot of seasonality, but there may be some really strong core products that fit in certain categories that you know that, okay, this is where we have a lot of room to save on efficiency here. So as you can see, I just gave you a quick little layout of product A, just having a little bit of impressions, 2 clicks, cost is fairly low, and it hasn't converted yet. It could be that it just hasn't had a high enough bid in order to get enough impressions to really make a big difference and hopefully gaining a click and conversion. Product B here has had quite a few impressions, really good click-through rate on it. The cost is up there. However, it's converted pretty well. It's had 3 conversions. And then product C, on the other hand, it hasn't really been quite cost effective, and depending on what your client's metrics are, if it's CPA or return on investment on it, this one may be one where you're like, we need to do something about this product, whether it be to lower the bids on this product or increase them. This is kind of the next step, is looking at that data and seeing, okay, how does these products kind of fall from a performance aspect? So if you're not utilizing a bid management platform, you may be able to utilize average data and your feed data and the competitive data to really bucket these products as they ebb and flow in performance. So kind of that next step then. So find those key trends. Find the product seasonality. Look at that price point over spend and find where kind of your curve is for those products, that maybe it's certain categories, you get it to a certain impression share, and then you know that this product is one that's just not a great performing product, so we need to bid a little bit lower. And look for conversion trends too. So kind of goes a little bit without seasonality, but you may actually see different trends where the seasonality picks up, but it may not, people may not be ready to buy and convert just yet, except for maybe a month or two later. So you just want to watch kind of where you bid on things. So this is just a few examples of how you can leverage that feed data. So think of it then with a custom label. Maybe you've looked at that data for all your products and you've seen that you can kind of label them a little differently. Like you have the high converting products, you have low converting products, and then you have no conversions for products. And now those no conversion products, it could either be, you can break it down a little bit further. Maybe it's high spenders and low spenders. And your high spenders at that point, they're probably just wasting budget if you've looked over a longer time frame of data. And at that point, you may just want to have anything that hits a certain threshold for those no converters and it's had high spend. Once it hits a certain threshold, you don't want to be spending almost any money on it anymore. Let it then auto flow into its own custom label, which you've then segmented for that custom label on the front end of your campaign. So really great way to go ahead and increase the overall performance of those campaigns on it. And if you do it well and really analyze that data, we've seen some great success of marrying that data into a custom label and then it being utilized on the front end of the campaigns. Okay, so as I was saying, to utilize that, create that feed-based logic on it, assign a label to it, then set the feed to refresh with AdWords data based on that data analysis that you've done. So for some, it may just be that you have it set to auto refresh once a week on it. If it's smaller clients, you may go ahead and just want to have it auto refresh with the AdWords data combining it. Maybe it's only once a month on it. And it also depends on that business intelligence data, because you can take that same thought and logic structure with that price competitiveness data as well. So besides just the performance buckets, you can also then take it from a price competitive bucket as well and utilize another custom label to do that. And make sure you're aligning that feed-based logic with your campaign structuring. So you can even marry what Andy was saying with the search queries and then build deeper within your campaign segmentations in the product groups of having a custom label that's more performance-based, and then have a custom label that's also price competitive-based, so where you know these products are very high priced versus the competition. These ones are much lower priced than the competition. So you know where to bid strategically, not only at the query level, but also now at the competitiveness and the performance level of that actual product. So I think that kind of wraps it up for me here. I'm going to pass it back to Karen.
Great. Thanks so much, Colleen. And a lot of interesting information, a lot of very in-depth tactical information. So I just want to remind our audience that both Colleen and Andy are hanging on here for a few more minutes. If you do have some questions, send them in, submit them, we'll get them to our speakers. Before we do that and start with our Q&A, we did have one more poll question for everybody now that we've heard what Colleen has had to add to the information. And then I'll bring Colleen and Andy in to talk about the results and what we see here. So here's our question. How often are you applying strategic feed-based changes to enhance your campaigns? You've got 5 choices. You need to pick one. So there's all the time, once a week, bi-weekly, monthly, or never. So while you think about that, I'll remind you again that we will be making this webinar available on demand later this afternoon. We've got a nice snowy day, as Colleen alluded to, so if you're home working or maybe taking a short day, you can always watch the webinar again at your leisure, pick up more of the information that I know Andy went through very quickly. So let's take a look at our results. So we've got about a third saying that they never use strategic feed-based changes to enhance their campaigns versus almost 20% that say all the time, and kind of evenly distribute also with another 20% saying twice a week and some saying monthly. Colleen, how do those results strike you?
It's definitely promising. It's great to see that people are utilizing feed-based initiatives that help the front end of the campaign. So definitely it's warming to see how many people have started adopting really that holistic view of feed-based and front-end initiatives in order to enhance the campaigns.
Andy, how about for you in your experience? These results kind of fit with what you would have thought, or like Colleen's saying, she considers this very promising, the people who are using it versus those who say never?
I'm surprised about the high number for people never doing this. I think there's one key information missing here, and this is how do the campaigns of all those people who apply strategic feed-based changes all the time perform against the ones who never make changes. And this is something we just don't know, but I'm pretty confident that it pays off to do this work regularly.
Well, with that said, and given our poll question, we do have a question here about how to get started with a feed management company. So let's start there. For those who said never, maybe they'd like some information about how to get started. Colleen, do you want to take a crack at answering this question?
Yep, absolutely. So I would say the first thing that you would want to go ahead and do is definitely have a good idea of where your current pain points are with your current data set. A lot of the times we've seen is sometimes that your data quality really needs to be cleaned up, or you're having issues with kind of consistency of pushing that data across. So know where your current pain points are that you want to go ahead and alleviate in order to find really the best fit for a feed management company for your team. The other is know what level of service you're looking for. Do you want a self-service, a full service team on it? And then from there, looking to just what channels you need to go ahead and send to. Make sure that feed company that you're going to be working with, well, there's also in-house, because there's always that option as well if you have an in-house development team that can help. How are they going to be able to really keep up with all the different channels and all the different templates that are out there that your feeds need to go ahead and get to?
Andy, anything to add?
No, not really. I'm totally in line.
Good. All right, we're going to get to another question. They're starting to come in now. We've got our audience thinking now. And Andy, I'm going to have you start with this one. What is the percentage in Google Shopping ads between the consumers who buy the product they click in the Google Shopping ad versus the consumers who eventually buy another product?
It's actually, I should have some very detailed data here, but as far as I remember, it's 64% of people searching for something very specific, clicking on a product, but then buying something completely different. So it's a bit counterintuitive. Lots of people think that there's a one-to-one relationship. You search for something, and this is what you click on, and you end up buying. But this is simply not true. And we've seen this in a very large data set.
Colleen, anything to add?
No, I don't really have anything to add. I definitely mirror Andy's insights into that. I have seen it also varies too. But for the most part, some consumers go ahead and will tend to, stick with that that same product or find something very similar.
Okay, good. Go on to the next one. We're getting quite a few questions now. I'm sure we want to get to answers. In our Google shopping campaigns, we see that the average order value is about half of our overall company average order value, $600 versus $1,200. We are pushing our high-ticketed items, which are over $1,000, so we're quite confused as to what's going on. Any professional hints? Andy, I'll let you start with that one.
It's a very, very interesting question. So let me quickly recap and summarize to make sure that I understood it correctly. So the key point here is that the order size through shopping is much lower than the average order value. So first of all, the question is, how can this be? And I mean, eventually it's due to the different user behavior, something we also see. So someone who's coming through search, for example, usually has something very broad in mind and starts browsing and surfing and adding lots of products to the shopping basket before he finalizes the order. Someone going through shopping tends to have a different user behavior, and these people might just take the first product, put it into the shopping basket, and quickly buy it and get back to Google. So this could be an explanation why this is happening. I mean, what could be done about it? It's eventually raising bids for the items with the high prices and see whether this makes any difference. It's really tough to answer without seeing the exact data, but it's a very interesting point, and I've seen that the order value is smaller on Google Shopping, but I haven't seen such a big difference. So if the one who has this question would want to approach me afterwards, happy to give some advice, but I need to see some more numbers.
Great. Yeah, and I'll remind the audience here, in the console, we do have both Andy's and Colleen's Twitter handles there. So you can reach out to our speakers through Twitter. And also, all of the questions will be forwarded to the Crealytics team. So if there are more in-depth answers needed, we will be able to get to them and get them to our sponsors at Crealytics, and they'll be able to give you some more specific answers. Let's try and get to a question that's a little bit more Colleen's alley here. Colleen, how important is properly implemented structured data on product pages for your merchant center feed quality? Okay, so on the actual page itself, if I'm kind of understanding what they're getting at on it, the feed quality, of course, has to be there. It needs to be cleaned up of any extraneous data, but on the page itself, you do want to make sure that you are able to, especially for variations, have that data structured so that the crawlers can go ahead and validate that what is being sent in the feed matches what's on the landing page. One of the biggest things that we run into seeing is that if a product maybe has multiple sizes but different price points for those sizes, the URL that is in the feed that comes across may not pre-select the correct size on it and the correct variation. So once the crawler gets there, it's grabbing that first bit of coding on the page and may see that maybe it's an out-of-stock product for that first one. And it's then thinking that higher variation is showing as out of stock, even though the feed is currently saying that's available product. So one of the big things I can recommend for that is definitely make sure you can either have it appended to the end of the URL so that it then pre-selects. A lot of the newer platforms out there allow for that type of functionality. Get with your developer, make sure that they can go ahead and then implement that, and it could either be just added to the end of the URL structure in feed, so that way you don't have to worry about consumers necessarily seeing that. They don't need to, but at the end of the feed URL, you really want to make sure that that's there so the crawlers crawl through that link and get that correct pre-selection versus if you just sent them to the page with all the variations, it's going to try to grab that very first coded variation in there. All right, great. Andy, let's try and get back to one for you. It looks like we have a question about, would you please go over the campaign/ad group priorities again? Andy, do you want to, can you go over that a little bit more again for our audience? All right, we might have lost Andy. I know he was calling in from Europe, so let's see while we can get him back, if we can.
Karen, I'm back.
You're back. Very good.
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah, so
and of course it didn't work. Yes. Could you put slide 16 on?
16? Sure.
Exactly. I think it's easier if we visualize this, and
absolutely.
I think,
there you go.
Perfect. Here we are. So Google offers you to have 3 different campaign priorities. So you can give a high, a medium, and a low priority. What we want to have is we would like to segment campaigns in a way so that the very specific detailed searches which contain a brand name, a designer name, and a product name are routed to one individual bucket so that we can raise bids. We would want to have the generics in a different bucket so that we can run lower bids. The way this is done is that you take one campaign with a high priority, and then you set negatives. And if you're selling products like Adidas or Nike or whatever, Bench and Lipsy, then you just exclude these designer names, as well as specific product names, whatever, Adidas Microbounce shoe. And this means that these very specific queries wouldn't match to the high priority campaign, but would be routed down one level. And then you exclude just the product names in the campaign with a medium priority. So in the end, you have a situation where the generics are in the high priority campaign, the brand/designers and the medium priority campaign, and in the low priority campaign, you have the very specific queries which contain a brand name and a product name. And in the end, the bidding should calculate bids in the, for each of the buckets, which usually would mean that bids would be higher for the very specific terms and lower for the more generic terms.
And I do have one side point to add to this too, because I've seen this happen a couple of times where someone gets this structure going and then they're like, oh, the generic campaign is just not doing well, and they turn it off. You don't want to go ahead and do that, because what's going to happen is if you go ahead and pause that campaign, it's going to push all those generic queries into that next medium priority campaign. So definitely keep in mind that if you create a structure like this on it and get it definitely a deep structure, you want to make sure that you're not just pausing it due to performance. If anything, go ahead and adjust your bids in the product group level in order to get more efficient on those generic queries.
I would agree. You should never turn this off completely, but rather manage it through the bids. But in the end, if the traffic doesn't convert properly and the bids might end up at very, very low point so that this generics campaign doesn't really get traffic anymore, then it's fine. I mean, we see this, for example, for high-end luxury retailers, which live from the brand searches, but the generic terms, like if you're selling a handbag for $3,000, the generic term handbag will never convert. It's always in combination with a certain specific brand name, and in this case, it doesn't make sense to really spend money on the generics. Usually it does, but it would run with lower bids without turning it off.
Okay, let's try and get to one more question before we have to sign off for today. So Andy, your recommendation for product titles is to use search terms that receive low traffic volume within our portfolio but have potential market value based on the traffic estimator? And how would you measure?
Yes. So we are applying usually two different techniques. So one is take the existing traffic you are getting and compare it to the estimated traffic Google is predicting. And if there's a very big gap, then there's probably potential. The second way to do this is by comparing search performance against shopping performance. And if, for example, your search performance is usually at whatever, 60% of the traffic volume of your shopping performance, but in some areas it's just 10%, then you know that something is wrong. So it's in the end all about finding anomalies in the campaigns, and you can use a benchmark search between shopping, or you can have a different benchmark which is the traffic estimation. It's never 100% reliable. However, it's necessary, or it's crucial to find areas which have potential, and so that you don't end up factoring laptop into products which are called notebook, because there won't be any impact. So we are just trying to find a way to avoid waste or wasting your time doing stuff which won't have an impact.
Great. Well, thank you, Andy and Colleen. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Again, a special thank you to Colleen and Andy for a very informative and timely presentation. And thank you, audience, for some great questions. As I noted a little earlier, all of the questions will get sent to our Crealytics team as our sponsor. So for those of you whose questions we did not get to, don't worry, we will get answers for you. A special thank you to our sponsor, Crealytics, which you can visit at crealytics.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here at Digital Marketing Depot.